Three nations presented a united front to the world. Behind closed doors, deep mistrust festered. Ideological differences threatened cooperation. Conflicting visions for the post-war world created tension. One ally felt deliberately abandoned on the battlefield. Secret weapon development remained hidden from partners. Poland's future became a breaking point. What they showed the public wasn't the full story. The surface of unity. When the world watched, three powerful nations stood together like brothers. America, Britain, and the Soviet Union presented themselves as an unbreakable team. Their leaders smiled for cameras at grand conferences. They signed agreements and shook hands. Newspapers printed stories of their friendship. Radio broadcasts celebrated their cooperation. To the everyday person, these three giants seemed perfectly united in their mission to stop the enemy. Children drew posters of their flags flying side by side. Families felt safer knowing these superpowers were working together. But this image of perfect harmony was carefully crafted. Behind the smiles and handshakes, a different reality existed. The unity everyone saw was real in one way. They all wanted to win the war. But the reasons why they fought and what they wanted afterward were dangerously different. Their shared enemy was the only thing holding them together, but even that wasn't enough. Shared goal. What made these three nations work together at all? The answer was simple but powerful: fear. Germany, Italy, and Japan threatened everyone's survival. If any one nation tried to fight alone, they would lose. America couldn't defeat Germany without help. Britain was already struggling to defend itself. The Soviet Union faced elimination on its own soil. Each country realized they needed the others, even if they didn't trust them. This wasn't friendship, it was necessity. Leaders put aside their differences because the alternative was unthinkable. Losing meant their countries would be destroyed, their people conquered, and their way of life erased. So they formed an alliance based on survival, not trust. When you're drowning, you grab any hand reaching out, even if you don't like the person attached to it. This desperate need to survive created a temporary bond strong enough to fight together, but fragile enough to break apart later. But survival alone couldn't hide what was happening behind closed doors. Propaganda and censorship. Governments knew the truth could destroy morale, so they controlled what people heard and saw. Newspapers couldn't print stories about allied arguments. Radio stations weren't allowed to mention disagreements between leaders. When Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at conferences in Tehran and Yalta, photographers captured them smiling and looking confident. These images were sent to every corner of their nations. Newsreels showed them as the Big Three, three friends planning victory together. But what happened inside those conference rooms was kept secret. Angry debates, accusations, and threats never reached the public. Censorship made sure of that. Government offices reviewed every story before publication. Anything showing cracks in Allied unity was removed or rewritten. Why? Because if citizens knew their allies didn't trust each other, they might lose hope. They might question the war effort. They might panic. So the truth was locked away and a comforting lie was broadcast instead. While citizens believed in unity, their military leaders were achieving something real.
Military coordination. On the battlefield, something remarkable happened. American and British forces learned to fight as one unit. They created combined commands where generals from both nations worked side by side. They planned operations together, shared intelligence, and coordinated massive invasions. When troops landed on beaches or parachuted behind enemy lines, American and British soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder. This wasn't just for show, it was real cooperation that saved lives and won battles. Supply chains connected across oceans. Factory workers in America built equipment that British soldiers used in Europe. This military partnership worked because it had to. Soldiers didn't care about political ideology when bullets were flying. They cared about the person next to them. Generals focused on winning battles, not arguing about government systems. This operational unity became the alliance's greatest strength and its only genuine success story. But even this success couldn't solve the deeper problems festering between their governments. Because beneath the military success, an ideological war was already brewing. Ideological divide. America and Britain believed in capitalism, private businesses, free markets, and individual freedoms. The Soviet Union believed in communism, government control of everything, no private ownership, and collective living. These weren't just different opinions, they were opposite views of how human society should work. Western leaders looked at Stalin's Soviet Union with deep suspicion. They remembered when Stalin made a deal with their enemy before the war even started. That agreement let Germany attack Poland without Soviet interference. How could they trust someone who once partnered with their enemy? Stalin, meanwhile, believed the West wanted communism to fail. He thought they secretly hoped Germany and the Soviet Union would destroy each other. Every conversation carried this underlying tension. When they discussed military plans, they were really asking, "What will you do with your power after we win?" Neither side trusted the other's answer. This wasn't a partnership built on shared values. It was a temporary arrangement between rivals. And nowhere was this mistrust more obvious than in Stalin's growing frustration. Second Front controversy. Stalin felt betrayed. While Soviet soldiers fought and fell in massive numbers against Germany's main forces, he kept asking America and Britain one question: when will you open a second front? He wanted them to invade Western Europe, forcing Germany to split its army in two. This would take pressure off Soviet forces who were struggling and suffering heavy losses. But the invasion didn't happen. Month after month, year after year, Stalin waited. Western leaders had reasons for the delay. They needed more preparation, better planning, and sufficient troops. But to Stalin, it looked like they were stalling on purpose. He believed they wanted the Soviet Union weakened by war. When the invasion of France finally came in 1944, Soviet forces had already been fighting alone for years. Stalin never forgot this. He saw it as proof that his allies were willing to let Soviet soldiers fall while they waited safely across the ocean. This wasn't just hurt feelings, it was calculated suspicion. These suspicions grew even darker when discussions turned to the future. Post-war planning. As victory approached, the Big Three had to decide who controls what. How is Europe divided? The arguments became intense. Poland was the biggest fight. Stalin wanted Poland to have a communist government loyal to Moscow. To him, Poland was a buffer, a protective zone preventing future invasions of Soviet territory. But America and Britain wanted Poland to choose its own government freely. They believed in self-determination, letting people decide their own fate. Neither side would compromise. Germany was another battleground. How harshly should they treat a defeated nation? Should Germany be punished severely or helped to recover? The answers to these questions would shape the entire post-war world. These weren't small disagreements about details. They were fundamental conflicts about power, control, and ideology. Each nation looked at post-war Europe and saw a different vision, and none of those visions matched. But the worst betrayal was still hidden from view.
Secrecy and mistrust. America and Britain developed the most destructive weapon in human history, the atomic bomb. They kept it completely secret from Stalin. Scientists worked in hidden facilities. Billions of dollars disappeared into classified projects, and Stalin, their supposed ally, knew nothing about it. When Truman finally mentioned it casually at the Potsdam Conference after the war in Europe ended, Stalin's suspicions were confirmed. His partners had hidden their most powerful weapon from him. Why? If they were truly allies, why keep secrets? To Stalin, the answer was clear. They never trusted him, and they planned to use their new power against the Soviet Union eventually. This secrecy destroyed any remaining trust between East and West. The alliance built on necessity crumbled as soon as the common enemy was defeated. What they showed the world was unity. What they built in private was the foundation for the next global conflict, the Cold War. The partnership was always temporary. The mistrust
was permanent. The alliance won the war, but lost the peace. The alliance won the war, couldn't survive the peace. What started as necessary cooperation ended in decades of Cold War tension. The Big Three saved the world from one threat, only to create another. Their public unity was real enough to achieve victory. Their private divisions were deep enough to split the globe in two. History remembers both the triumph and the tragedy that followed. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy isn't really your friend.